Emily Parker never imagined that a quiet Sunday morning with her father, Daniel Parker, would end in tragedy. One simple act to scare birds from the garden turned into a fatal mistake, leaving a community in shock and a father haunted forever. It was a quiet Sunday morning in the small town of Maplewood, a place where everyone seemed to know everyone else, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The streets were lined with oak and maple trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Birds filled the air with cheerful songs, flitting between yards and gardens. In one modest house at the edge of town, Emily Parker, a bright and curious 12-year-old, woke up to the usual hum of suburban life. She had a love for nature, spending hours exploring the backyard, observing the squirrels, and counting the birds that came to feed each morning. Her father, Daniel Parker, shared a similar fascination with the outdoors, but his interests leaned toward hunting and firearms. To him, Sunday mornings were sacred, reserved for cleaning his rifles, checking his ammunition, and shooting at targets in the backyard. Most neighbors thought of Daniel as quiet and reserved, a man devoted to his family but distant from anyone who didn't live next door. Some whispered that he could be reckless, quick to anger, or careless with his tools. Though these stories were rare and usually dismissed, on this particular morning, Daniel noticed a flock of birds hovering over the garden, pecking at the seeds he had so carefully planted. Irritated, he decided to take action. It was a harmless enough plan in his mind, a few warning shots to scare the birds away, nothing more. He retrieved his favorite shotgun from the cabinet, polished it briefly, and checked that the safety catch was engaged. The warm sunlight glinted off the metal, casting sharp reflections across the yard. Emily, curious as ever, had wandered outside without her father noticing. She was drawn to the sounds of the garden, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the soft metallic click of the gun being prepared. From her vantage point near the flower bed, she observed her father as he lined up his first shot. There was no fear in her eyes, only fascination. For Daniel, it was just another routine morning, a simple task to protect his garden. But fate can be cruel, and in those moments, neither of them realized that this ordinary day, filled with mundane routines and family habits, was about to take a dark and irreversible turn. The ordinary, seemingly safe life of a suburban family teetered on the edge of tragedy, waiting for a single, unguarded moment to change everything forever. The morning sun climbed higher, spilling warm light across the Parker backyard, but it could not dispel the tension that had begun to build. Daniel adjusted his stance, aiming the shotgun at the birds that had been feasting on the garden seeds for days. He thought he was in control, that everything was routine, that this was just another moment of suburban life. Emily, unaware of the danger, moved closer to watch, fascinated by the precision her father displayed with the weapon. In a fraction of a second, the ordinary would become unimaginable. The shotgun went off with a deafening blast. At first, it seemed as though nothing had gone wrong. Daniel looked at the scattered birds, satisfied that his plan had worked. But then he realized Emily was no longer beside the flower bed. Panic surged through him as his eyes scanned the yard, and he saw her lying motionless on the ground. The realization hit like a physical blow. His daughter, his little girl, had been struck. Daniel dropped the shotgun and ran to her side, his hands trembling, heart pounding, mind racing. He tried to comprehend how the simple act of scaring birds could have led to this. Sirens wailed in the distance as neighbors, alerted by the noise, called for help. Within minutes, the backyard was filled with flashing lights, officers, and paramedics. The quiet, predictable Sunday morning that had begun so peacefully was now consumed by chaos. Neighbors stood on lawns watching in disbelief, whispering frantic questions about what had happened. Some remembered Daniel as a calm man, devoted to his daughter, while others recalled moments when his temper had flared, wondering if recklessness had played a role. Police cordoned off the area, taking photographs and collecting evidence, while paramedics worked desperately to save Emily. But it quickly became clear that her injuries were too severe. The weight of what had occurred settled over the neighborhood. This was not just an accident. It was a devastating reminder of how quickly life can change. Friends and family gathered, some crying openly, others frozen in shock, all struggling to process the unimaginable. Daniel, sitting on the grass beside the garden he had intended to protect, could hardly move. His mind replayed the moment over and over, searching for answers, searching for a way to undo what had been done. In those hours, Maplewood was transformed, the quiet suburb now marked by tragedy, leaving everyone to face a horrifying reality. A father's hobby, a routine morning, and a moment of curiosity had collided in the most tragic way imaginable. As the initial shock of Emily's death rippled through Maplewood, investigators began to arrive at the Parker home, determined to piece together exactly what had happened. The backyard, once a place of ordinary suburban life, was now a crime scene, marked by scattered seeds, footprints, and the eerie silence that followed a sudden tragedy. Officers photographed every angle, measuring distances, and examining the position of the shotgun. Ballistics tests confirmed what seemed obvious. The fatal shot had come from Daniel Parker's own gun. The evidence left little room for doubt, yet the investigators knew that understanding the accident required more than just physical proof. They started questioning neighbors, friends, and family, trying to understand the man behind the tragedy. Daniel, still in shock, could only offer fragmented explanations, his words stumbling over themselves as he tried to reconcile his actions with the unthinkable result. Meanwhile, the forensic team examined the weapon itself. The safety mechanisms had been disengaged, the trigger sensitive, and the angle of the shot aligned perfectly with Emily's location. It was a terrifying combination of circumstance and human error, but the investigation began to reveal details that complicated the story further. Daniel had purchased unusually large amounts of ammunition in recent months, and some neighbors mentioned that he had been practicing in the yard far more than usual. A few recalled seeing him handling the gun recklessly, sometimes with little concern for where the pellets might land. These discoveries raised uncomfortable questions. Was this truly an accident, or were there warning signs that had gone unnoticed? Detectives also delved into the family's private life, looking for stresses or conflicts that might have influenced Daniel's behavior. They found a mixture of normalcy and tension. Daniel was deeply attached to Emily, yet friends described moments of impatience and short temper that sometimes surfaced around trivial matters. Every detail mattered: the position of the sun, the trajectory of the shot, the layout of the garden. Each piece was a thread in the larger puzzle of how a routine morning could spiral into irreversible tragedy. As evidence accumulated, the line between accident and negligence blurred, and the town struggled to understand a father's role in a disaster that seemed almost impossible. For investigators, the challenge was not only to document what happened but also to make sense of the human decisions, the small miscalculations, and the overlooked risks that had combined in a fatal way. The backyard of the Parker home, once a place of safety and ordinary life, had become the center of a chilling story about chance, carelessness, and the fragile boundary between life and death. As the investigation continued, the focus shifted from the immediate tragedy to the deeper patterns that had led to Emily's death. Forensic experts meticulously reconstructed the scene, noting that Daniel had ignored basic safety precautions that could have prevented the accident. The safety catch on the shotgun had been disengaged, the trigger was exposed, and Emily had been standing directly in the line of fire without anyone realizing. Investigators concluded that a single, simple precaution, keeping the safety engaged, establishing a safe perimeter, or simply alerting Emily to stay away, could have spared her life. The more the experts analyzed, the more it became clear that this was not a random, unforeseeable event. Daniel's carelessness, compounded by moments of inattention, had created the conditions for disaster. Alongside the technical evidence, the human side of the story began to emerge. Friends and relatives described Daniel as a man with two sides. On one hand, he was devoted to Emily, providing her with a comfortable home, encouraging her interests, and teaching her about nature and wildlife. On the other hand, he could be impatient and volatile, prone to bursts of frustration that sometimes frightened those around him. In interviews, neighbors recounted instances of Daniel raising his voice over minor issues or handling his firearms without consideration for safety. These conflicting images painted a complex picture of a man whose love for his daughter coexisted with reckless tendencies. The investigation also revealed how quickly ordinary routines could turn deadly. The backyard, where Emily often played and explored, had seemed safe, familiar, predictable, and secure. Yet it was this very sense of normalcy that had concealed the dangers of an armed adult moving carelessly within it. Authorities emphasized that the accident was preventable, highlighting the importance of education, supervision, and respect for firearms. As the town absorbed the weight of these revelations, community members struggled with grief, anger, and disbelief. The tragedy sparked discussions about parental responsibility, gun safety, and the invisible risks present in everyday life. For Daniel, the emotional toll was immense. Every moment, every detail, replayed in his mind as he grappled with guilt and regret. Maplewood, once a quiet suburb, had been forced to confront the harsh truth that even the most ordinary of mornings could hide danger, and that a single lapse in judgment could leave a permanent scar on an entire community. The story of Emily's death was no longer just a shocking event. It became a chilling lesson about responsibility, awareness, and the fragility of life. The courtroom became the center of Maplewood's attention as Daniel Parker faced charges of involuntary manslaughter. Inside, the air was heavy with grief, anger, and disbelief. Families, neighbors, and friends crowded the benches, all seeking answers, closure, or perhaps understanding of how a father's routine Sunday morning had ended in tragedy. Prosecutors laid out the evidence meticulously: the trajectory of the shot, the unlocked safety, and the moments of inattention that had led Emily into harm's way. Forensic photos of the backyard and detailed ballistics reports painted a clear but devastating picture of what had occurred. Daniel sat in the defendant's chair, a mixture of despair and disbelief etched across his face. He could barely comprehend the reality that his actions or inaction had taken his daughter's life. Friends and acquaintances gave testimony, describing him as a man who loved Emily but struggled with responsibility at times. The conflicting narratives created a tension in the courtroom. How could someone so devoted cause such unimaginable harm? Outside the legal proceedings, Maplewood grappled with its own shock. The tragedy sparked discussions about gun safety, parental oversight, and the fragility of everyday life. Local schools and community centers held workshops, urging families to be vigilant about firearms, even in what seemed like safe environments. For Daniel, the trial was more than a legal process. It was a confrontation with every choice, every misstep that had led to this outcome. Each day in court forced him to relive the morning, replaying the shot, the sound, and the instant when everything changed. The verdict, when it came, reflected the complexity of the case. He was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, a judgment acknowledging negligence without intent. Sentencing was severe, but tempered by recognition of his love for Emily and his remorse. The story of Emily Parker became a cautionary tale, one that spread beyond Maplewood. News outlets, online forums, and social media discussions dissected every detail, from gun safety tips to parental responsibility. Families everywhere were reminded that tragedy often lurks in moments of routine, and that a single lapse in judgment can leave lasting consequences. In Maplewood, the Parker home remained quiet, the backyard empty, and the garden untended. The town carried the memory of Emily's life and death, a haunting reminder of how quickly ordinary days can turn into irreversible loss. Daniel's grief, the community's mourning, and the lessons learned from the tragedy would linger for years, a sobering testament to the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance, awareness, and care in every moment.